Hey everyone, this is Nathan Donnelly with Northwest Resilience, and I am hanging out at home right now. I've got a day off and taking the opportunity in my free time to clean up some of the woods that I live around. This is actually behind me there. That's my home, and I live in a forest. We're on about 10 acres here. I rent some property from some good friends of mine, and this forest has not been cared for in quite a while. So before they bought the place and I moved here. So what I've been up to is doing some of my FireWise work and cleaning up the area and making it a safer place for us all to live. And I wanted to do a video on what that means. You can see behind me, there's a row of burn piles there. I just made those. There's 3 of them. There's another one behind one of those trees you can't see right now, but I wanted to go over what the anatomy of a burn pile is, because I think people who haven't learned how to do it in a good way, waste a lot of time and energy doing it, and they don't do as good a job as they could. So you can see here, I've got three burn piles that size here. It's about 5 feet by 3 feet. And I came out here the other night with my electric chainsaw and limbed. You can see these cut places on the trees behind my back here. I limbed a lot of the trees behind me so that they don't look like, that thing does about 8 feet in the air anymore, because that is fire hazard. It's also not a healthy tree. So I just went through here really quickly. Again, I spent maybe 20 minutes the other night just cutting off of an area that's not even, maybe it's a quarter of an acre. Put everything on the ground. It was the end of the day. I did it till it was too dark to see. And then came back. This is 2 days later. And I'm just picking up all the sticks that I dropped on the ground and putting them into these piles here. And these piles, there's actually a little bit more to them than you might know about. So I wanted to talk about how I like to make a pile. And this is something that I learned over 10 years ago when I worked for the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council in Northern California. And we did a community workshop of how to do these. And really, it's pretty simple, but you can see at the top there that I've got some paper on there. That's pretty obvious. But what else is going on is that this burn pile, you see the bottom of it is made of these really fine twigs and sticks. So when I have a bunch of material laying on the ground, I will usually start with that finer material that's going to ignite easily. That's because that stuff is really fluffy. It wants to be, it wants to take up a lot of volume. And it's also what I want to use to start the fire. So I will put that at the bottom, and then I will put progressively heavier branch wood on top of that to do 2 things: to compress it, and also to keep that stuff up off the ground where it's going to stay drier. If you have larger diameter wood laying on the ground, it is pretty much absorbing moisture at all times, and becoming something that's not going to burn very easily or very cleanly when you do your burn piles. And I don't typically burn stuff that's bigger than, say, arm diameter in a burn pile, because I think that should go into our wood stoves. I think that should be part of what's keeping our homes warm in the wintertime. And that is a carbon neutral energy source for heating our homes. So I also, you can see these big logs laying on the ground behind me. I don't worry too much about them. They are a really important habitat for all manner of invertebrates and other critters that live inside of those. Those are food sources. They're also water sources in the summertime for fungus. Those absorb water, like I mentioned earlier, and fungus will tap into those with mycelial networks and live on the water that's in those logs, you know, further into the summer than they normally would have. And they're not light, flashy fuel. So if a fire was to come through here, because I already did most of the limbing in this section behind me a couple of years ago, it's going to be a pretty tidy little ground fire. And these rotten logs are going to smolder like cigarettes, but they're not going to become something that creates a canopy fire behind me here. This is a pretty decent looking forest as far as fire safety is concerned. So that's because I came through here and I did stuff a couple years ago. There's a lot of material on the ground now that there wasn't then, because we've had 2 or 3 years of winter storms knocking branches down. But so I took out with the chainsaw a bunch of material for about 20 minutes. I came in here today for about 20 minutes, and then I just piled it up into these piles. This is 40 minutes of work, and I cleared out an area this big. You'll also notice, though, that I haven't put everything in the pile yet. Like right here is a bunch of material I cut down that it kind of looks like it's piled, but it's actually just laying there. That's where it fell off of the tree. And I haven't put this stuff into piles yet because my burn piles are already big enough. When I come back here in a couple of months, after it's been raining and made fire safe because this place can't burn anymore, people don't realize that in the wintertime you can't have a forest fire. It's virtually impossible if you've had wet come in already. You could go through this place with a blowtorch and spray everything, and you will not be able to get a forest fire to ignite here. So that's the time of year I want to burn my burn piles, because it's perfectly safe at that time. So I'll get them big enough to get started, to get hot, but I don't want them so big that they're going to scorch what's above me here. I'm in the canopy of the trees right now. So if I'm producing a ton of heat, then I'm going to potentially burn the needles on these trees. It's very unlikely I'm going to actually kill a branch or a tree, but those needles will hang on for 2 or 3 years, and they'll be burned and red and not look right for a while. So I just do small piles, and then I leave everything else scattered around like this right here. And then when those piles start burning, I will then casually walk around and toss all these sticks in the fire. And I've got 3 burn piles built right here now. I could do 3 more easily and manage all 6 of those fires without, and still be leaning on my shovel most of the time. It's very easy work. Most of the work I did out here a couple of years ago, I was injured. I've had 2 shoulder injuries in the last 2 winters. So I wasn't out here with a chainsaw. Actually, I wasn't out here with any tools. I was out here picking sticks up off the ground with my hands and putting them into piles. And I did a lot of work that way. You don't need to be a strong, hardworking, athletic, anything. You could just need to get out in the woods and pick sticks up like humans have done since the beginning of time to feed their fires. So, yeah, I guess that's what I wanted to say. I just wanted to encourage you to get out onto your own property, pick sticks up, and put them in piles. Find a smart place where there's not a canopy that's 15 feet or less right above where you're going to do your burning. But when you put them in piles, you want to put them there's 2 things you want to think about. You want to put them parallel to each other. So branch wood is typically fairly linear. So you want to put them in line with each other above that light debris that I was mentioning earlier. That allows things to become more compressed and dense. So you end up with a hotter fire that burns more cleanly. You can also put more material in a smaller pile. So it's more efficient. These piles that I've done here, if you could see, there's one right there, there's one right there, and there's one just right around the corner there. They're only 5 or 10 yards apart. Personally, if I have to walk more than 15 feet to a pile to drop a stick in it, then I feel like I'm being inefficient. So rather than do like a big old fire that's going to leave a scar on the ground for 10 years, I will do these teeny little fires that are basically 2 or 3 sizes of a campfire, And you didn't even notice it, but that last pile is right next to where I did a pile 2 years ago, and there's almost no sign of it left other than some chunks of charcoal on the ground. So um, it's less work. You don't have to haul material everywhere. You don't have to make a big pile. You don't have to have any equipment. You can do this with a pruning saw in your bare hands. I'm literally, I'm wearing a tank top and sandals right now, and I'm out here doing work in the woods that's going to keep our homes safer. So the other thing, you want to put them, your parallel sticks, you want to put them if you're on a sloped area, so your sticks go up and down the slope. And what that does is, as a pile burns, it kind of falls apart. So if there's larger debris in there in particular, like small logs, you don't want them rolling down the hill after the pile burns up. So if they just fall deeper into the fire, then you're getting what you want. There was some larger branches on these trees that I cut off, and instead of putting them in the piles, what I did is I just drug them off to the side of a driveway and left them there because my neighbors heat with firewood. So my rule of thumb, yeah, again, if it's much bigger around than my arm, then it makes more sense to burn it in our wood stove. So man, there's not a whole lot more to it. You wait till the season is right to burn. The paper that I put on top of there, one of those is just a paper bag from the grocery store. It's not, you don't need anything fancy. You can use cardboard boxes, old tarps that have, got too many holes in them to use for anything else. Something that you don't mind being out in the weather for a few months and maybe will actually be fuel in the fire. Just like that, I'm not going to take that paper away when I burn that. You only need enough coverage to keep the core of the burn pile dry. You don't want to cover the whole burn pile. You would like it to be open around the sides because that's air movement. If you can keep the core dry, then you can get a fire going, and the fire will dry out anything that's gotten rained on or anything. So your main concern is just keep the center dry, and you're going to have a successful burn pile. Ideally, you'll have a number of burn piles that are successful. I'm doing this along my driveway. I'm about 150 feet right now from my house. I'm also selecting, we're on 10 acres right now, so it's not really feasible for me to do all 10 acres in my off time. So I'm high grading to places that are most important. So my driveway is about 1/8 of a mile long, and if that's on fire, then I'm not going to want to drive out it. It's going to be a dangerous situation. So that corridor around my driveway is where I'll focus my energy most initially. I'll get that safe, and then if I have to evacuate from here, then I can do it safely. So can my neighbors. And then I've selected the area around my house that's closest to it, and I've cleaned that up next. And then I'll go over time. We're going deeper and deeper into the woods, and taking care of burn piles. Now, I've been here for about 4 years. About two of those years, I've been kind of out of commission with injuries, but I've done, I bet, 2 or 3 dozen burn piles on this property, and about 1.5 acres, 2 acres of it has been treated and is really safe. It has completely changed the character of this forest, whereas originally you couldn't see into the forest through the edges because it was so dense with overgrowth that it kind of like cut us off to experiencing the land that we live on. And now we have full access to it again. It's become, in like the most natural way, almost more park-like, and that's really been cool. It's been cool to be able to look out my window and see into the woods and watch the deer wander by and see what the rabbits are up to and stuff. So that's another thing, is really dense forest is kind of unnatural. Fires and humans have been keeping the debris in forest fairly cleaned up for eons in most places that we live, and that's what wildlife has adapted to like. There's not food in an area where sunlight never hits the ground and you can't walk through it, so it makes it better for everybody. So think about areas that are higher risk because you need to because it's an evacuation route, or because maybe you have a neighbor or tourists in a given area that like to do campfires, so there's a higher risk of a fire coming in your direction from that quadrant. What's downhill of you is going to be more of a risk factor than what's uphill of you, because fire burns uphill. Which direction is the prevailing wind? You're going to have more likely fire coming from that direction as well. So just kind of think about your landscape and how fire might want to move through it, and high grade to those places first, and then get on the lower risk stuff after you've gotten the first stuff buttoned up. And it's really a pleasurable way to be out in the woods. It's like it's not any less enjoyable than going out on a hike. I'm just hanging out in the woods right now. I'm listening to the wind through the trees, and I'm making the place more beautiful just for being here. So get out in the woods, be useful, take care of your property, be a land steward, and enjoy the process. You'll be glad you engaged in that way. Everybody have a good one. Bye.